while ito, occupied siya nito. Okay? And then, di ba, para i-correlate ko lang, dito yung cribriform plate ng ethmoid, dito dumadaan yung olfactory rootlets. Ito, nakasalpak siya dyan. So, immediately above, talaga nasa taas lang ang olfactory valve. Okay? And then, di ba, sabi natin, andito yung optic foramen. Dito papasok ang optic nerve. Ngayon, pag sinundan mo na siya sa brain, ito na siya. Ito ang optic nerve. Ayan. Itong optic nerve sa... Teka muna, ipaganon ko siya. So, left ito. Left optic nerve, right optic nerve. Itong gitnang ito, chiasm. Paglagpas ng chiasm, track na siya. Okay? Lecture na ba sa inyo yun?
Kailangan mapaspoon yung long exam bukas.
Kumirit ka. Ganda ng hirit mo ah.
Bukas nililecture.
Kasi hindi namin tatanong. Okay, sa ano naman, wala masyadong important part dito. Ito yung parahippocampal gyrus. More importantly, we will talk about the blood supply. Your brain, since it controls all the activities in your body, is supplied by two main sets of blood vessels. The anterior circulation coming from the internal carotid, and the posterior circulation coming from the vertebrobasilar vessels. And these two at the base of the brain form a circle. It's not really a circle, it's like an octagon where there is the blood flow from the anterior and the posterior circulation really connect with each other. And this is a very providential part of anatomy and creation, because if one part of the brain has a blocked blood supply or diminished blood flow, it can be augmented by the flow coming from so if the posterior circulation is the one which is affected, the anterior circulation can augment the flow. If the anterior circulation is affected, the posterior circulation can augment the flow. Okay? So, as I told you, your anterior circulation mainly comes from the internal carotid. The internal carotid, okay? And the internal carotid, mas malaki ito. So, this is the internal carotid. Itong malaking ito. Okay? And it gives off its end branches, the anterior cerebral and the middle cerebral. Okay? If you follow the course of the middle cerebral, saan siya pupunta? The middle cerebral enters, saan siya pupunta? Ikot siya dito, papunta siya sa sylvian fissure. And it supplies mainly the dorsolateral surface of the brain. Therefore, if you have a lesion of the middle cerebral artery, what areas will be affected? Both precentral and postcentral gyrus, but primarily what part of the body? You remember now your homunculus, your face, your upper extremities, your hands. Okay? And if it is on the left middle cerebral artery, what will be affected? If it is the left middle cerebral which is blocked or undergoes thrombosis, speech. Okay? So this is the area, boundary of the middle cerebral artery. Okay? Now, the other branch of the internal carotid is the anterior cerebral. The anterior cerebral, saan siya pumunta? Dito, sa interhemispheric fissure. And then, it would supply the medial surface of the brain up to the parieto-occipital sulcus. Magmula dito hanggang dito. Therefore, if the anterior cerebral is the one which is affected, you may have sensory and motor manifestations more on the lower extremities and buttocks. And that is why, depending on the symptoms of your patient, you can say which vessel is affected more, whether it's the middle cerebral, if the symptoms are more referable to the face and upper extremity, or your anterior cerebral, if the symptoms are referable to your lower extremity. Okay? So, hanggang dito sa parieto-occipital. So, ano nagsusupply nitong occipital lobe in the inferior surface of your occipital and temporal? Ano? Your posterior cerebral, which is a branch of your basilar. Okay? So, ito, posterior cerebral. Okay, let's review the branches of the circle of Willis. Anterior circulation, internal carotid, anterior cerebral. Supposedly, here in this brain, you can see that this is the internal carotid, this is the anterior cerebral, this is the anterior cerebral of the other side, and connecting the two is a very short anterior communicating. Ito, itong maiksing to. Connecting to the anterior cerebral of the other side and the internal carotid of the other side. Okay? Now, your internal carotid of the other side is connected to this vessel here by this. Naputol. Or this. Mas malaki. And this is your posterior communicating. So, internal carotid, posterior communicating, posterior cerebral, basilar, posterior cerebral, posterior communicating, internal carotid, anterior cerebral, anterior communicating, anterior cerebral, internal carotid, nakabalik ka na. Okay? So, what are the vessels comprising the circle of Willis? Let's start with internal carotid of this side. Internal carotid, papuntang, clockwise. Internal carotid, ano to? Posterior communicating, and this is your posterior cerebral, basilar, posterior cerebral, posterior communicating, internal carotid, anterior cerebral, anterior communicating, anterior cerebral, internal carotid. Ano ang nasa labas ng circle of Willis? Hindi siya kasama. Middle. Lumabas siya. Pumunta siya doon. Okay? So, the middle cerebral is not part of the circle of Willis. Remember, your internal carotid is a branch of your common carotid. Diba? Okay. Now, the vertebral vessels, vertebral arteries, are branches of your subclavian, diba? At the, supposedly, it would pass through the transverse foramen found in your upper cervical vertebra, and then at the ponto-medullary junction, hindi natin siya nakikita, naputol siya. At the ponto-medullary junction, the two vertebral arteries of both sides would fuse to form the single basilar artery. Your basilar artery has many paired branches, among which are your anterior inferior cerebellar artery, but the last paired branch before it gives off the terminal branch, its terminal branch is the posterior cerebral. Before it gives off the posterior cerebral, it gives off another paired branch, which is your superior cerebellar artery, which of course supplies your cerebellum. So, ito ang superior cerebellar. Let's look at this. Here, you can see the vertebral. Kita ba? Yun, tama. So, this is the vertebral. left, right. We don't really want you to